Welcome, everyone. My name is Mel Ching, and I'm the Director of Community and Engagement here at What School Could Be. We're happy to have you joining us either live or asynchronously. So we're kicking off our Summer Dream Big Series with Kevin Strauss. He is a consultant and CEO of Uchi LLC. He focuses on making life easier and happier. And Kevin's worked with human behavior for 2 decades now and has identified emotional health as its driver and human connection as its primary supporter. So thank you, Kevin, for getting us here today. And I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Mel. Thank you, everyone. This is going to be pretty casual. I don't have a PowerPoint. I'm not here just to talk the whole time. Actually, the bulk of this, I'm hoping, is just going to be group discussion, brainstorming, like troubleshooting, or trying to come up with ideas and plans on what we can do next year. And that's really how this started. I posted a question in the What School Could Be community tab, just because I'm curious. I am not an educator. I'm not a teacher. I'm a entrepreneur. I'm a consultant. My background is actually engineering, so STEM, if you will, but my background's engineering, mechanical and biomedical engineering. But I spent a lot of time in the emotional health and human behavior just because I'm so curious. It's really all been like self-study for 2 decades on why do people do what they do and why do I do what I do. I just want to understand things. So I was just posing this question. We're at the end of this school year cycle, and it's tough out there. I hear it. I read enough articles. Things aren't really getting better. I mean, I just don't. I'll be blunt. Things are just getting worse. And if we keep doing what we've been doing for the past 100 years, we're just going to get the same problem. And if we let kids, any child, any person, slip through the cracks, then that could be the next school that gets shot up. That could be the next school that has a suicide or 2 or 3. More resources needed for kids struggling with depression, anxiety. More teachers quitting, right? Because they're so burned out and they're struggling. And so I just posed the question, what's going to be different in the next school year, 2023-24? What can we do differently going forward? And I'm sorry to say, the response was crickets. There were a couple of likes on the post, but no comments to get the conversation going. So Mel and the team were generous enough to offer this to have a conversation, and I'm happy to lead it and support it. I have some ideas, but this is not supposed to be the Kevin show. But what I will say with that, just to give a little background, because my perspective tends to be a little different than most people. I'm a very much outside the box thinker. I know people say that, but I've got like 80 patents to support that. So I find new solutions that work and I bring them to market with teams of people, not just me. And so in the biggest overview that I can share is thinking about kids, students, teachers too, but we'll just focus on students for simplicity. If we're not well, if we're not in a state of wellness, or at least, on that spectrum toward the more constructive side of wellness, we're going to be struggling, and it's going to be hard for us to do the things that we need to do, specifically learn, right, and be successful in school. To me, there's lots of different models for wellness, but I've landed on 4 elements. I think of them like the 4 tires on a car, which would be physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. The definitions that I choose for mental, emotional, and spiritual are very different than most, and I'll share those. But if we're not nurturing our kids and we're not inflating, like putting air in each of those 4 tires, it's like trying to operate a car with a flat tire. It doesn't work. And then it's difficult in school for the kids to learn and the teachers to do their job. So I want to try and help inflate each tire. And where I've landed is it's the emotional health tire that seems to be the one that is just flat. And this isn't just for kids in school, but I would generalize to all of humanity. So where I've landed on with the definition of emotional health, and this is a little different, so hopefully we can start with a clean slate. Emotional health to me is a person's ability to give and receive love. And by love, I mean love, connection, a sense of belonging. And if we don't feel love, I'm just going to say love for sake of simplicity again. If we don't feel loved, it causes pain. And a person will do anything to ease our pain, to ease their pain. And in the absence of knowing how to love and connect, we end up turning to behaviors. I know a lot of behaviors get listed under the mental health umbrella, but to me, mental health is really our ability to focus, to concentrate, to think clearly, to perform cognitive tasks. So basically, I see our mental health as more like our frontal lobe, decision-making, reasoning, doing our math problems, writing our compositions, those kinds of things. Whereas our emotional health is rooted in our midbrain, our amygdala, where our subconscious is really stored. And if we're upset, if we're not operating well in our midbrain, we can't even engage our frontal lobe. We can't even engage our learning brain if our midbrain, if our emotional health state is compromised. And I think that's one of the big problems and challenges is that we're having in school. Kids are even coming to school amygdala hijacked. That's a psychological term, where they can't engage their learning brain if their midbrain is already hijacked, if their emotional health state is hijacked. And what that boils down to me with emotional health is if we don't feel heard and valued, if we don't feel understood for just the person that we are, then we don't feel like we matter. And if we don't feel like we matter, we don't feel valued. And value translates to love in our brain. So if we don't feel loved, then we're going to compensate in some way. And that's where we see these behaviors. That's where kids are drugs and alcohol and acting out in class and not paying attention and bullying and depression and anxiety and all of these behaviors. And I can give you piles of research that support all that, but not enough time for today. That's where we're coming from. So to me, if we don't nurture emotional health, just like we have to nurture our physical health on a day-to-day basis and our mental health, our spiritual health, if we don't nurture all of our health, if we don't put air in the tire each day, then we're going to struggle. And that usually comes through in our behaviors. So what I really want to do is start getting ideas on how we can nurture emotional health, how it can get integrated into the day-to-day school, into the classroom, into curriculum, used as a teaching tool. And I don't have all the answers. I have one or two that I'm happy to share, but I'm not a teacher. I'm not in the classroom with students. What do you think the students need? How do you think we can engage students? What can we do that can get integrated, that can be implemented, and that's scalable so it can grow and help the whole school? Because we're never going to have enough behavior specialists and counselors and social workers and psychologists. We're never going to have enough to support an entire student body and staff, not to mention families. Okay, so that's sort of my big overview. Any questions on that? And then we can also start brainstorming. And I just want to hear, what do you guys think? How can we improve school?
I just want to say I really appreciate it.
Can't hear that.
Oh,
Oh, there we go. Yep.
Just really appreciate that because I think so many times we focus not on what the outcomes of school should really be. We have learners that we think, okay, let's give them more content, let's give them more tutoring, let's give them blah, blah, blah. And the thing is, what we're missing is really that, I call it, what I work with is the optimal learning environment, right? That connects to the emotional, it connects to that authentic, meaningful? Do they feel safe, connected? But that's for both the adults and the learners in our learning spaces. I think it's one of the biggest things that when we design, we think that, oh, we use character strong. Oh, we did that from 8:30 to 9 o'clock today. So we've covered it. Check it off. And so when I'm hearing you say, how do we integrate it? How do we make it a part when we design? I think that's the conversation we need to have for learners and adults in our learning spaces. But your tires, that really just, I'm going to use that with my learning communities, because I just said, if you are running on a flat tire, I mean, that's for the adults and the learners.
Mhm.
Wow.
Yeah, and you can't just inflate one tire and think your car's going to run well. And that's pretty much what we do with physical health. We think, oh, just run more, just eat better. But Mel and I were talking earlier. I'm a 22-year Ironman triathlete and coach. It doesn't matter how much I exercise. If I'm not nurturing my relationships,
Mhm.
I'm usually not as happy. I can try and avoid and tire myself out with triathlon, but if I don't feel connected to the people who matter to me, I feel empty.
And that's, I
You know,
appreciate that too, because I think, how do you even connect to, maybe they don't have that one connection with you as that teacher, but we have many people in our buildings, right? I think about our community. We talk about the mentors, the mentees, that they make a connection with. So I'm looking forward to
It's
hearing.
critical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kevin, I would love to add to the many layers that Janelle has put in here. I too love and have heard now for the first time the 4 tires metaphor, and Janelle, I'm going to be carrying that forward with me as well. This morning, on my way to my daily 7 a.m. ocean swim, which is crucial to my 4 tires being inflated every day, I was listening to our colleague Steve Shapiro's latest episode of his Experience Matters podcast. So the layer that I would love to add in to what Janelle said is that in order for all kids to be healthy, all kids have to feel as if they intimately belong in the education process as not just learners, but as partners. And this is something that Steve and his guest, who happens to, I believe, direct the High Tech High Graduate School of Education. You can check it out when you check out the episode. And I haven't finished it yet, but what was so interesting to me was just the extent to which, and sorry, I'm a little bit fractured, but I'm going to add in another element to this, which is a book that I'm almost finished with called Street Data. And so, what we have to be doing is to include all kids in the data that we're collecting to figure out how they're doing. It can't just be one subset of kids. And I love the fact, Kevin, that you're just like a relentlessly curious learner. And there's all these elements to you that I'm continuing to learn. I didn't know you were an Ironman triathlete. I'm not Ironman, but I was a triathlete, earlier on. So this is so cool. And so when we start to really include the voices of all kids from all ethnicities, from all types of backgrounds, with all types of predilections and everything else, when we start collecting that, then we are moving down into street data. And that street data gives us a rich picture of who they are and where they're at and what their health, what their mental health is. And I don't know quite how we get there yet, but I'm feeling so much more hopeful just kind of knowing this. It's like you see a star and you're like, I'm not quite sure how to turn the boat yet, but boy, I see that star and it's awful bright there, right?
Yeah.
And so, Janelle, to finish the thought, like, you're right, it's just these plugins that happen at these specific moments. They're clearly not going to work, really. And that there has to be this super whole child approach to this. And I love the fact that we're in this little group together along with Dave and Jennifer and Janelle and Mel. And it's just like, this is it. This is what learning can be about. We're actually practicing it right now in this meeting together.
Yeah.
This is what helps people feel whole and connected, right, Janelle? Like Motley Crue style. That's the thing.
Yes.
It
The
is.
connection, the
Yes.
belonging. And if a
Mhm.
child doesn't feel like they belong at their school or even in their own home, and that happens all the time, too
Yeah.
often, but when they don't feel that belonging, and kids have things to say, even 4-year-olds have things to say, but when we finish their sentence for them, when we shut them off because we know what they're going to say, but we don't give them a chance, and then when we don't acknowledge what they say, when we don't validate, we don't have to agree or disagree, but if we don't validate what they're sharing, then they feel like they don't belong. They miss the connection with the school,
Yeah.
with the mentor, with the teacher, even with their peers. And then it doesn't take too many instances, and now they're the complete outsider. And not to go really morbid, but a couple years ago, I got hold of a suicide note from a student who was successful and died by suicide in college at Christopher Newport University in Virginia. And I did an analysis, and I can share this at a later date, but I did an analysis of his suicide note. And in his very first paragraph, he said, "I never felt like I belonged anywhere."
Yeah.
And not feeling like you belong is not a mental illness. It's emotional. He didn't feel like he belonged. And how many kids, and I've done enough analysis of the shooters and so on, throughout the years. It's that belonging, it's that connection that you're talking about, Josh. It's if every child doesn't have a chance to share their perspective and be heard, then they slip through the cracks. And that's what we're seeing. And then it shows up as addiction or depression or suicide or gun or whatever. So
And Kevin, I'll
Kevin,
just
oh,
add, oh, sorry, Mel, just
no,
real quickly.
finish your thoughts. Yes.
I did an episode recently, Kevin, with now two-time author Stephanie Malia Krauss, who just released her second book called Whole Child, Whole Life. And to piggyback on what Joy said in the chat, hello, Joy, spiritual. So what spiritual health? So one of the things that Stephanie Malia talks about is that in this political climate, it becomes difficult to talk about spiritual health because it immediately becomes a religious thing. But her argument is everybody has some spiritual angle to them. And internally, away from the politics, we need to address this and nurture it and grow it and build it in kids. It's again, back to those North Stars and what you point to. So thank you, Joy, for that comment. Go, Mel.
That was actually exactly what I was gonna say. There was a comment in the chat from Joy, and she is wanting to know your definition of spiritual health, Kevin. So that's a great segue, Josh. Thank you.
Yeah, perfect.
So happy to share my definition for spiritual health. My definition for physical health models pretty much everything that you see in society already, so that's fine. But spiritual health, so this is kind of a trigger for me, so I'm going to try and stay calm. But for me, spiritual health has absolutely nothing to do with God or religion. I was raised Jewish. I am a 100% atheist. I don't even believe in the concept of God or religion. So you're telling me, people with the classical definition of spiritual health is telling me I can't be spiritual? I'm just as human as the next person. I can be just as spiritual. I feel like the definitions for spiritual health, the common definitions, discriminate against people who don't believe in their God or their religion. So for me, the definition for spiritual health is your ability to know and pursue your purpose in life. You can have many purposes. You can have big purposes and little purposes. You can have short-term and long-term purposes, but it's what matters to you at your core, your essence, your soul, your spirit. That to me is your spiritual health. What gets you out of bed each day? And this definition does not discriminate against any God or religion or anything like that, because if your purpose in life is to serve God and Jesus Christ, great, go do that. I want nothing more for you than to do that. If that's what nurtures you at your core, at the soul of who you are, great, go do that. But for me, it's doing things like this and helping people connect authentically. That nurtures me at my core. So my definition for spiritual health is your ability to know and pursue your purpose in life. And it can be whatever it is for you and you and you and you and you and you. Doesn't matter. It's up to you.
Kevin, can I jump in? Sorry. Oof, boy, I love this conversation. Again, referencing Steve Shapiro's episode with his guest at High Tech High, the whole point of the episode is that she lived the first 37 years of her person of color life trying to be white, because she felt, and her mother felt, that that was the way that she was going to have to succeed. And then she has this road to Damascus moment, and all of a sudden she flips around and discovers the joy of being who you are and who you were born as. And from that point forward, that became her purpose in life, was to live the fullest possible life as a person of color, to be part of her people's culture, if you will, and all people's cultures, right? So just like what you were saying there,
So
again,
for
on the
37
spiritual level,
years, for 37 years, she wasn't being
super
true to her
uncomfortable.
core, right?
Super
Her
uncomfortable.
essence.
Yes.
And it
Correct.
was a big disconnect. So her
Correct.
spiritual health tire was like flat. Because
Correct.
she was
And it
trying to
wasn't
pump it up
until,
with, you know, something else, not air, you know.
yeah, and she was in the middle of her doctorate when she discovered what was happening, and then all of a sudden it was like a snap. And here she is, the author of a new book, and you know, doing the great equity work and all of that. So it's fantastic. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Jennifer, your hand is up. You want to unmute?
Yeah, I apologize in advance for having the camera off. I'm doing some house cleaning and packing and stuff, so I'm all over the place here. But I did want to jump in and say, I think all of the factors that you're talking about, Kevin, part of the challenge of it is that they're invisible factors, right? And I mention this because I think that question of how we talk to kids or how we find ways to give them outlets is so key. And it's not even necessarily always talking. You know, I found in my English classroom for years and years that a good journal entry where the students knew that they could, you know, fold the page over and I wouldn't open it if they didn't want me to read it, you know, if it was too personal, but just giving them that space to do it was so important. And I was sitting here thinking about an assembly we had years ago in a school that I taught in Denver, where there was it was a man speaking about mental health and emotional health, really, in a lot of ways. And he was talking about how, you know, if one of your peers breaks their leg, everybody helps carry their stuff and open doors and moves things out of their way. And you know what I mean? Like there's a visible injury and they know how to respond to a visible injury. And so I think part of what we have to figure out how to get better at next year and beyond is to make some of these things visible and acceptable as visible, if that makes sense, right? So that we can remove some of those taboos around the topics. And I mean, I know there are a bunch of platforms and tools that you can use now, right? That will help you understand how students are doing, right? And a lot of them are daily. There's one out of Finland that I'm familiar with called School Day, that, you know, it's every morning students sort of take a questionnaire or survey. And in theory, it's going to give the adults information about their mental health, but there's no school day for adults, right? And I'm thinking about all the ways that we could, you know, all these creative ways that we could find to make some of this a little bit more visible and a little less taboo to have visible, so that the student who walks into school feeling depressed and feeling like that's obvious and feeling transparent and vulnerable knows it's okay to say, I'm feeling really vulnerable today and I need this kind of support, right? And learns how to ask for what they need as well. So that's kind of where my thinking was going, was how might we make it a bit more visible in a way that feels safe and comfortable for students and adults.
Yeah, thank you. I would love to, before Dave gets a chance to share his point, I would love to address that straight on. Because yeah, if something's invisible, then how do you deal with it? How do you address it? Just like the old adage of, if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist and you can't solve it, right? For me, everything is 100% visible already. We're just not looking at it through the right lens. Behavior is your symptom. Behaviors are the visible factor. What I've learned in these 22 years of digging into this is that the more extreme the behavior, the deeper the emotional pain. People aren't crazy. People aren't insane. People aren't evil. People aren't bad. There's no gene for evilness. There's no hormone for badness, but there is a hormone specifically designed to love and connect, and that's oxytocin. We are designed to love and connect. And when that's not happening, that's when we turn to behaviors. The behaviors that we're seeing, the acting out in class, the pulling of hair, the, God, I'm going way back, dipping, the girl's hair in the inkwell. This is like way back in the day, right? Before my time. But the throwing rocks on the playground, but even the constructive behaviors, such as the extreme overachievers, the people who, if they get a B, they're freaking out because they got a B. That's an extreme behavior. And that's a sign that something is unwell, something is amiss if they have to get that A and nothing else will solve. And I would say that that A is that's what they're assigning their value as a person to, and value translates to love. I've been working with surgeons my whole career. These are all overachievers, and I can tell you these people are geniuses, and in the operating room they are amazing. But most every one of, I'm generalizing here, but so many of their personal relationships are terrible. Most of them are divorced. Most of their kids don't like them, but they keep overachieving in the workplace to compensate for their inability to love and connect. So I think the data is there. It is visible. We just don't know how to look at it. Just like Alex, who died by suicide at Christopher Newport University, he said straight away, I didn't feel like I belonged anywhere. We're just not looking in the right place. And I'm sorry to say, I think the whole mental health industry just isn't looking in the right place, but that's a whole nother topic.
Dave.
Yeah, thank you. I've got so much I'm so far away from you guys. I'm in Malaysia, actually. It's first thing in the morning here, but I've got so much in common with you, actually, even though it's a small group. Kevin, I not only share your hairline in terms of our follically challenged tops of our head, but I share your passion as a non-educator for this topic, because I am not an educator. I do not come from an academic background. I come from a learning and development background, however, in the corporate world, which I've retired from, and which I am now directing effort and energy into helping the next generation not make the same mistakes as I made and my generation, and also be a better version of their self, a fuller self. Jennifer, when you spoke about that instance of a broken leg in a classroom or anywhere in society, and our natural inclination to help that person, that really resonated with me, actually. It's so true. And in fact, it reminded me of something that I've read where humanity was defined, civilization and being human was defined when they discovered a body that had a broken leg and it had been fixed. And their take on that was that somebody had actually had to care for that person in order for them to survive. It was a fossil that they discovered of a human body. And we care for people. It is something that is embedded within us. All of those other behaviors that you mentioned, Kevin, happen because of our environment. They are not embedded within us like love and compassion is. And so the reason why I've joined this call, actually, particularly of this subject, is it's really pertinent to me and obvious to me that those behaviors that you were talking about, Kevin, are as obvious as the broken leg, actually. But we've stopped looking for them. And we've not deliberately done that. We've got busy. You know, we've got other things to look at. You know, we've got other distractions, and we are a very curious species, in as much that our curiosity drives us, and it drives us in the wrong direction sometimes. That's my thoughts on this. And there is a way in which I think, you know, and this is why this topic is so important, for schools to get it back on their radar screen, so to speak. And I have come across a tool which I'd like to share with you. I don't know, I'd be amazed if it's not out there in the US. This is an Australian-based tool that is used in over 150 schools. It is also used with parents and with companies. And it's an emotional check-in tool, which is digitalized. The tool's name is iYarn. And as a sort of bit of an iYarn, spelled I-Y-A-R-N. So and that name comes from actually an Aboriginal term known as liyan. And the Aboriginals ask people how is your liyan? And what they mean by that are those 4 tires on the car. How is your complete self? And if you were to say to an Aboriginal that asked you that, as indeed Lockie Cook, the founder of liyan, did, "Oh, I'm okay, mate," they would find that offensive. They would find that disrespectful, because you haven't sort of honored their interest in you. And of course, we do that in Western society when we ask people, "How you doing? How are you today?" You know, we dismiss it. "I'm good. I'm fine," you know, and we don't listen. So over the past few years as an executive coach, I've sort of tried to help people sort of, you know, get deeper into what does fine actually mean and things like that. This tool can really help. And and because it's digitalized, actually, everybody's got access to it. The kids particularly are switched on to it. And I will, when I've finished talking, share some links in the chat that you can go and have a look at. I happen to be I stumbled across this tool. I'm now the distributor for it in Southeast Asia, which is 11, 12 countries in this part of the world. Although I focus primarily on Malaysia and Singapore. This tool has got global aspirations, so I will also put Lockie Cook's contact details in the chat. So if anybody out there, particularly you, Kevin, with your entrepreneurial interests and your passions as well for this topic, are interested, it might be worth having a look at it. It uses a sort of a landscape, basically, which is a sort of spidergram as well, to make it very visual. So I throw it out there really as I think this is something that schools could be doing differently, and introducing this tool so that it becomes a lot more visible, and the topic of particularly, you know, emotional health is out there, because you can easily, in a classroom, in a year group, in a school, do a check-in and monitor it as well, and then take positive action around obviously what you're discovering. Shut up now, sorry.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much. And those are the kind of, you know, speaking like from Jennifer with making things more visible and being aware and what to look for, and what you're talking about with these assessments that we can do. And then, it doesn't have to be just once a day. If it's middle school or high school where you're switching class to class, you can do a quick check-in. How are you doing throughout the day? I think a lot of teachers are pretty good at like knowing where their students are, but to really be able to track it, and if you can't do it in real time, you've got this check-in through the tool that you're speaking of, Dave. And here's a chance to like, okay, let me follow up later on then, because if I can't do it right now, at least I can follow up at the end of the school day or something like that. So these are the kind of tools, like what can we do different next year?
Mel, you're up. You were first. Oh, you're on mute, I think.
I was looking at the chat. I'm sorry. I just
Yes.
wanted to to call out a couple of things in there. So Jennifer mentioned the Mario framework, which is awesome. Thanks, Jennifer, for sharing that. And Joy mentioned a ruler tool out of Yale. So there's a couple different tools. And then I also wanted to offer something really simple that I used to use in my classroom. And I will acknowledge right now that it's not very nuanced at all. But when the children walked in the classroom, they had a pocket chart with each of their names and 3 cards in there. It was a red, a yellow, and a green. And as they walked in, depending on how they felt that morning, they would put the green card for like, yay, glad I'm here, a yellow for like a handle with care, and a red for like, I'm not feeling good. And, you would need to check in with me. I will also mention that at the beginning of the year, most of them chose to put green. But as trust built and as the year continued, they did put like yellows and a few reds here and there too. So it's not an instant fix, and it's something that you have to work with, but it was also very helpful, I think, for everyone in the classroom, myself and the students, to just kind of gauge how we were feeling on any particular day and who we needed to be like extra special kind to.
Yeah, thank you. There is no quick fix to this, right? I don't. The only quick fixes that I know of in life are if a basic need is not being met, like if your airway is getting cut off, as soon as you get air, there's a quick fix. Or if you haven't had anything to drink for 24 hours, as soon as you get water, there's a quick fix. But other than your most basic needs, there's no quick fixes, and there's no quick fixes to your health. That's from birth to death. You've got to nurture your health. So it doesn't have to be high techy or whatever. It can be totally analog, like what you're talking about, Mel, just to get that regular interaction, getting comfortable with sharing how you're feeling on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour type basis. And then we can each help and support each other.
I think I would add, Kevin, and building off of what Mel just talked about, and also, from Dave and everything that's been added to the chat, maybe it's not a quick fix per se, but there have been a number of things that have come across our radar screen. I'm referring to Mel and I recently. Chris Baum, who's the author of the awesome book, Finding the Magic in Middle School, has been doing a lot of work on advisory. So again, not a quick fix, but a school can pretty quickly retool its advisory period to become that kind of check-in that's really needed, rather than, as I experienced in all 3 schools that I taught at, the place where kids try to jam the last few minutes of their homework in before they rush off to class at 7:30 in the morning when they should be asleep anyway, right? So the advisory period is one. And then Mel, I remember when Januwase hosted, was it Corey or was it and the educator who was talking about how every day, Kevin, right? And so every day he's committed to, when his kids come into his class, there is a check-in that happens. And the reason why we had that session was called the Goodnight Moon session, because he wrote a blog and he read it to us out loud, Kevin. It was amazing. It was heart-wrenching and at the same time inspiring, because his kids were responding to that love coming from him in magical ways. And again, not quick fixes, but pretty close, right? You can get pretty close to something that can happen tomorrow, Could happen on
Mhm.
Monday if you just kind of arrange it. So yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Thanks, Mel,
Beautiful.
for throwing that blog
Thank
in the
you.
chat.
Yeah.
Perfect.
On
Love
that same
that.
note, I was thinking about, I've seen elementary teachers do this really well with really young, well, elementary and preschool, to be honest with you, it works really well. Again, not digital, nothing fancy, just a chart of emotions on the door with faces that make it clear what emotion is which, right? And as they're coming in and they're getting their hug and being greeted, they're letting the teacher know which one is how I feel today. Very, very simple, could happen at the beginning of every class, right? And I think even something as simple as that
Mhm.
can give teachers a great deal of information. And then by extension, I guess I wonder what might it look like if, for example, principals did exactly the same thing as their faculty were walking into a faculty meeting.
Oh my God, can you imagine?
Like,
Amen.
I
Can you
doubt
Amen.
that
imagine what that would be like? Wow.
I doubt that anybody who's ever done it, but I've seen, faculty meetings that are run more like community meetings, right? That start with recognitions of things that people have done this week and things like that. How amazing would it be if they made that intentional move to really check in with every person? And if anybody, touches the face that looks miserable and beyond, beyond feeling beyond repair, well, then that means there's some follow-up that needs to happen, right?
Yeah, yeah. That's kind of the point, is these things don't have to be complicated, right? But they need to be able to get integrated and be repeatable and scalable. And I think these kinds of check-ins, and wow, imagine if you went into a staff meeting, with the principal or the administrator, and there was a check-in there too. Like, wow, I've never even heard of that happening at the staff level, but staff need it too. Wow, that was awesome. Thank you for that.
I'll add really quickly, Jennifer, that our school here in Hawaii that we all know about, the School for Examining Essential Questions of Sustainability, otherwise known as SEEKS, and I was one of the people who helped write that charter. They begin every staff meeting with a community ball, which is, that ball of yarn that's constructed by the community. You wrap it all up together and then it gets tossed from one person to another in a check-in process. And you get all of this stuff out on the table. And then, wow, Kevin, what a place to start from when you're ready to do the work of helping to build a community for kids. It's
Yeah,
just
yeah.
like, it's such a no-brainer. And yet sometimes I wonder if the political climate or the cultural climate, at least here in this country, somehow seems to be not wanting, or some people are not wanting to do that. It's as if they're trying to push off that emotional health and vulnerability, or the health that comes from that vulnerability, for reasons I don't know. But in the end,
Well,
it really
maybe
impacts the kids, right? It
maybe
impacts the
because
kids.
maybe those decision makers high up are getting triggered by
Yeah.
feelings or emotions, and they don't know how to deal with their
Mm,
own emotions.
mhm.
So like, well, forget that. I'm just going to suppress it all and just do what I tell you to do. And that's the end, like, I'm the person in
Mm.
control. I have the power. You do what I tell you. Again, to me, it all comes back down to their poor emotional health because their behavior is destructive.
Right. Right. I'm going to follow up really quick with Dave's comment in the chat. Dave, the yarn concept actually comes from something called P4C, lowercase p, lowercase c. So P4C is philosophy for kids. And the community ball is the mechanism by which these communities of kids engage in, especially elementary, big philosophical, well, small, medium, and large philosophical questions. And the ball is the way of passing the conversation around the room, Dave, and it actually creates health when you do that. So just
Yeah.
wanted to toss that in
Yeah,
as well.
no, that's fantastic. A good and a great pun with tossing it in as well. I've used it corporately in circles that I run as well, and you'd literally toss a ball from one person and then intuitively they toss it to the next person. It saves me as a facilitator having to choose who's going to talk next and things like that.
Mhm.
But what I loved was it being a ball of yarn
Mhm.
and everybody's emotions are captured in this ball of yarn, and obviously the word of yarning then fits
Yes.
much more naturally, and yarning actually is a very good Irish expression as well. I don't know if the Aborigines stole it from the Irish or the Irish stole it from because the Irish always tell a good yarn, of course, so, and they love it. And I just think
Yeah.
that storytelling generally is something that we intuitively know how to do, but we've lost the art of telling our own story, actually, teachers as well.
Absolutely.
And I think, you know, if we can remaster and re-engineer how stories are getting shared in the school environment, we can really make an impact. And actually, just picking up on the thing that really hit me hard, Kevin, about your circumstances in the US. It happens elsewhere in the world, of course, but I see and hear about it more in the US, is the terrible, you know, extreme violent behaviors and access to weapons that children have. And when you started talking about how that, you know, these things happen, it really is shockingly terrifying that, you know, young people can feel so driven towards that type of behavior that much, it's actually more important to educate children in emotions than it is in academic subjects. If you want to ask my honest opinion, you know, we need to produce balanced human beings rather than clever ones. We've got enough of them.
Yeah, oh my gosh. I love what you're saying there, Dave. And I don't even know where to begin with that, but yeah, just, you know, it just seems like, actually, I think it's more than seems, I think it is. It's easier to feel anger and hate than to feel with our own pain of not feeling loved and connected and belonging. I think that's a lot of it. We are almost to the top of the hour, so I'm just gonna throw in a couple of other ideas from my bag of tricks. The first one is one, this gets to, it's such a great segue from what you were talking about, Dave, with telling our stories and being able to share. So I have a friend who's a teacher. She teaches like 7th or 8th grade, and we've just been having conversations, blah, blah, blah. And I said, you know, what if you tried this? Because she had a couple of students who were just really, you know, out of control and not paying attention and all that kind of stuff. And I said, you know, what if you just try starting your class, take just the first 5 or 6 minutes of class and ask a question to the whole class, and maybe 4 or 5 students get to answer it, but you also, as the teacher, have to answer the question. And, you know, each day you come up with a different question and different kids get to answer, but the teacher will always answer, because we know from the research that the most important element of education is the teacher-student relationship. So if students don't feel a connection and don't understand and don't know their teacher as a person, then they're not going to feel connected. And I was like, just try it as an experiment. And she did. And she's like, oh my God, the classes were so well behaved when I would do that at the front end. So, you know, you incorporate a couple of these different things. You know, you get the green, yellow, or red card, or the, you know, happy face, middle face, sad face. You start the class with a couple of questions. People get to answer. People feel heard. People can tell their little story. It's almost like a show and tell, but with your story of whatever the question is. And it doesn't have to be a really heavy question. In fact, I would say, don't make it a really heavy question. Try to just go below the surface, but it's not about sharing your deep, dark secrets. It's certainly not about therapy. It's just sharing a little bit of who you are. And I can give lots of examples of this. So that's something that a friend had done in her classes, and with really great success. And now I will do my shameless plug for what I have come up with, because I'm all about, identify problems. I'm an engineer, I solve problems. And what I have done is created an app. So it is tech, but it's an app to do very similar what I just shared that my teacher friend did in real time, but this is an app to do it asynchronously. So the app is called Uchi, and I'll just put a bunch of my links, like contact information and links in the chat. But Uchi, which means in group or inner circle in Japanese, it's a social platform. It is not a social media. There's a very distinct difference there, but it's a platform that facilitates conversation. It is asynchronous conversation. It is led and driven by questions. So the app is free. We have this massive database of questions. You get on, you answer, but the main rules of Uchi are only your Uchi friends can read your answers, and they can only read your answer if they've already answered that question. That's all free. It's available. Have fun, use it, and it's 100% private. Nothing is ever shared publicly, ever. There's no data mining. There's no algorithm on what you see. You only see your friends' answers. You can comment on your friends' answers, and it's only done in chronological order. However, then there is the business side of it, because you can't have a business without making money. But the business side is where you, as a user, can become a tribe. We call it an Uchi tribe leader, where you come up with the questions and you invite a subset of people, let's just say a classroom, and you all engage in conversation together. And this is a way that the teacher is guiding the conversations. So it's not all over the place. It's totally safe. It's been in public schools. I've worked with juvenile court systems. That's how safe and private it is, that they trust it. But it's all led by the teacher. And then further, it's easy to bring in parents, because we also know from data, when the more parents are involved in education, the better the kids do. So Uchi is a platform that anybody can use. Obviously there's a fee for schools and businesses and things like that, but it's a way to get the conversations going, to actually facilitate real conversation. And the data, I've published research on the platform, but I mean, I can tell you that there's a pilot study that I can share with anyone who's interested, a case study of a public school system that was using Uchi, and it was a group of like 25 students, just with like 2 questions a week. And what they noticed, that within 2 weeks of using it very minimally, this was during 100% virtual learning, but they noticed that kids were calling into class more frequently, kids were turning on their cameras more often, kids were speaking up more often in class, like we've been doing today, and especially the typically quiet kids were speaking up more on camera. And that was in just 2 weeks of using the Uchi platform in a very minimal way. So I'm happy to talk more and more about it and whatever, but that's just my solution that is 100% scalable, because I can set up an entire school in like less than a day, and there's no training required. So that's my shameless plug. Okay, so that's about it. I mean, thanks, all these ideas. I'm going to save the chat. This is recorded. I'm sure Mel has all the logistics on how that's going to be available. And I would love to continue the conversation with anyone, or if it's worthwhile and people want to have a follow-on conversation to keep on digging in, because we've got like 3 months before the next school year begins. And some of these things we can implement in summer school, right? Some of the things that have been suggested today, we can implement right now. So let's make a difference.
Hey, Dave,
Thanks so much,
it's
Kevin. Oh,
it's only Wednesday, and this is already the best conversation of the week. This is the best hour of the week, hands down. Thank you. Really awesome conversation.
Thank you.
thanks, Kevin, for designing this, making time for connection and conversation with all of us. I just want to point out we have a few sessions next week that falls in line with our Summer Dream Big series. So we have a watch party, the innovation playlist created by Josh Rapoon Productions. We have an Eye on Student Protagonism session with students from Columbia, hosted by Jennifer Klein. We have our mini Va'a discussion group on Wednesday. We're looking at an article written in the Harvard Business Review, and we have another session on feedback and assessment for a purpose-based curriculum with another community member, Barbara J. Smith. So we'd love to see all of you there. Thanks so much for coming tonight, and hope you have a good one.